Good afternoon. Happy Saturday, guys. Thank you for joining me. So, this is our live stream for today. Sorry, this was scheduled from yesterday. So, normally we have YouTube live streams every other Fridays at noon. Yesterday, something urgent came up, so I wasn't able to do it. So, here we are today. So, thank you for joining me. Now, let's take some questions. So, the purpose of this live stream is to answer your questions. If there's anything that you need support with, to support you with that. So, let's get started here. Does anybody have questions that I can answer for you? Please feel free to put that in the chat window if you could. Looks like I'm having a little bit of trouble here. So I'm not sure if you guys have put anything in the chat, but I'm not able to see it. Oh, here we go. Okay, perfect. Question here. How many months do we have to finish the fundamentals and residential real estate courses? So in terms of the courses for the real estate license, for the fundamentals for our school, you have 6 months to complete the fundamentals of real estate. And then once you've completed that, you have another 6 months to complete the residential course. Generally, we find most people are able to complete each course in about 2 to 3 months. So you don't necessarily need the 6 months. I find actually it's a little bit more challenging if you take the entire 6 months because by the time you get to Unit 10, you would have forgotten what you learned in Unit 1. So personally, I like to keep the timeline a little tight. So generally, I say like aim for 2 units a week. And at that type of study plan, you are able to get through the entire thing in about 2 months. So you'll be able to do the fundamentals in 2 months. And then you take a couple of weeks to prepare for the exam and just go write the exam. Like, don't drag it out too much. I find if you do, if you're taking too long, you will forget stuff. So you want to write the exam as it's fresh in your memory. So ideally, you want to do it within the 2 month time frame, but you do have up to 6 months for each course to finish it. Okay. Next question here. Could you go to the estoppel certificate? Okay, so what is estoppel certificate? Certificate is something that the lawyer will request before they complete the transaction. So as they are convinced or doing the conveyancing from, changing the title from seller to the buyer, one of the requirements they would have would be they'll ask for the estoppel certificate. So estoppel certificate basically gives you the financial details about the property. So if you're representing the buyer, you don't want the buyer to take on any kind of unpaid dues that the seller has. So any kind of arrears, outstanding amounts, you don't want your buyer to have that. And that's what, again, exactly why the lawyer will need those details. So estoppel certificate will tell you the financial details, which means it will tell you what the monthly condominium fees are, if there are any arrears, so any outstanding amount that they have not paid towards those monthly condo fees, those will be in there as well. And in addition to that, it will also talk about any kind of um, in litigation. So any litigation against the condominium corporation. So if there is a court case in progress, and that will show up there as well. And the reason we want to see if there's any litigation or court case in progress is because if the condo corporation loses that court case and they have to pay, let's say, $1 million in monetary damages to the other party, or whatever the amount may be, 100,000. So then condo corporation does not have any money. The only way the condominium corporation has to raise funds would be to put special assessment on the condominium unit owners, or they can increase the monthly condo fees. So it's better for the buyer to be aware of that before purchasing the property. So this is why estoppel certificate is very important. So just to recap, estoppel certificate basically gives you the financial details about the condominium. So this would be your monthly condo fees, any outstanding condo fees, or any amounts that are outstanding for, let's say, special assessment or anything like that, and any interest on those as well. And then any kind of litigation in progress, so any kind of lawsuit in progress, that will also be shown on the estoppel certificate. So that's estoppel certificate. It's an important document that you need when you're helping somebody with a condominium transaction. Okay, sounds good. Any other questions? Okay, so there were some questions sent in. So let me see if I can grab those real quick, and perhaps we can cover those. In the meantime, if you have a question for me, please feel free to put it in the chat, and I will answer that question for you. Actually, one of the things that I would like to cover, again, this is a question that we get asked very often, and a lot of people seem to be confused between the two terms here. So that would be difference between a condition and a term on the contract. So condition on a purchase contract is anything that can, the text basically say it's an impediment to the contract. That means it can stop the contract from proceeding. So conditions would be something that basically can stop the purchase going through. So, for example, financing condition. So, financing condition is something that is important. So, when you have a buyer, unless they're paying cash, they will need a mortgage. So, they can only buy the property if they're approved for a mortgage by the bank or the lender. So, in this case, they don't know till they have presented all the facts about the property. So that when the lender qualifies somebody, they're looking at the financial situation of the person as well as the details about the property. So both of them count towards getting the approval for the purchase. So in this case, you do want the buyers coming in with a pre-approval. So you know that as a buyer, they are qualified and now they just have to get qualified for the property. But that will be one of the conditions. So you want a condition in the purchase contract where it says the buyer has 10 days, for example, or 2 weeks to go to the lender and get the financing approved. So that is a condition. If the lender comes back and says, no, we don't approve you, in that case, the deal falls apart and the contract doesn't move forward. So that's a condition. So that's one of the conditions. Another condition that we generally come across would be your property inspection condition. And this is something that you want to, again, have in the contract because let's say the property has a problem. So just last week, we were looking at a property, and when we went to look at it, the first time we looked at it, we didn't see any issues. But the next time we looked at it again, there was water flowing in the basement. And so clearly there was some type of issue. Either there was foundation issue, so water was coming in through the crack in the foundation, or the grading wasn't done properly where the water wasn't moving away from the property, it was moving towards the property. So when the grading is wrong, so the grading needs to be away from the property, but if it's grading is towards the property, that means if the water is being drained towards the property, then it can come into the property. So there's one of those, it was one of those issues. So foundation issues could be very costly to fix. With the grading, again, it is a big cost because you have to dig it up, put weeping tiles, you have to fix the grading, move the water away from the property. So there's cost involved in this. So when you do a property inspection and you find something like this, in that case, the buyer then has an opportunity to not move forward with the deal. So my buyer did not want to move forward with the deal unless they get it fixed, or so we'll see what happens with this one, because the sellers are looking into the issue. So that's a condition. So property inspection can be a good condition to have in a purchase contract. So that those are conditions. Another one, a common one that you will come across, will be for your condominiums, for example, condominium document review condition. So when somebody's purchasing a condominium, so we were talking about estoppel certificates, that's one of the condominium document you want to review. But there are other condominium documents. So you want to look at the budget. You want to see if there's any special assessments of the property. You want to see any big items in your in the budget, right? So if there's big problems with the property or so forth. So those are some of the things that we will be able to find from looking at the condominium document. So if you're helping someone purchase a condominium, then that would be one of the conditions that the buyer will likely have in there. So that's known as condominium document review conditions. So all of these are buyer conditions. So conditions can be from the seller or they can be from the buyer side. Both parties can have conditions. So conditions are there to protect the party that has included the condition, right? So that's what the purpose of the condition is. Now, on the other hand, term is anything that is part of the contract. So for example, terms would be we are selling the property for 650,000, right? That's the purchase price. That's a term. Or the empty vacant possession will be provided for the property on July 31st. That's another term in the contract. Or the seller will steam clean the carpets before they close on the property. So all those things are terms. So these are basically points of agreement, what the buyer and the seller are agreeing to, basically. So those are terms. Now, unfulfilled terms or unsatisfied terms do not prevent the contract from moving forward. So whereas if the condition is not met, the contract will not move forward. Whereas if a term is not fulfilled, the contract will still move forward. So let's say the seller let's say there was an issue with the water in the basement, they did not fix that issue. So in this case, we would still close on the property. Now, as let's say buyer's agent, you want to have a conversation with the buyer's lawyer and suggest they hold back certain amount of the proceeds. So you don't want to pay the entire amount. So for example, we had this problem with when we were purchasing our office condominium. So in this case, when we purchased the unit, there was water issue. There was water coming through one of the glass walls. And they said it was, the property issue, it was fixed. But I was not convinced that the problem was fixed. And therefore, I talked to the lawyer and said, let's do a holdback of $5,000. Sellers did not want to do the holdback, but it was necessary because otherwise we were not closing on the place. And then it was a lawsuit. Basically, you can't just refuse to close on the property, and it will cause its own set of problems. But in this case, so they agreed to do a holdback of $5,000, and it turns out the problem was actually not fixed. As soon as we got the snow melt, there was water all over the place. So now we had to go back and fix the issue. And good thing we had the $5,000. It cost us a little bit more than that to fix the issue, but it was nice to have the $5,000 because at least you have something that you can use to fix the issue, so you're not coming or you're not out of pocket on the entire amount. So when it comes to the terms, so terms, again, they're points of agreement, things that the buyer and seller are agreeing to. But if one of those conditions or one of those terms is unfulfilled, the contract will still move forward. The property you'll still close on the property. So let's say steam cleaning the carpet, right? So if the seller did not get the carpet steam cleaned, the property would still exchange hands. So the buyer would still purchase the property, but maybe they'll do a holdback of $250, which they will then use to clean the carpet. So that's the difference between the term and a condition. Unfulfilled or unmet conditions will prevent the contract from moving forward. So if the buyer does not get the financing, you cannot move forward with that deal. If the property inspection was unsatisfactory, the deal is done. You don't move forward with that. But the contract would move forward with unfulfilled terms. So we just recently had this issue where the closing was on the 15th for the property, but there were some issues, so we had to push back the closing. So again, it's unmet terms. So the term said the closing would be on the 15th of July, but now the property is closing on 31st. So we have to push it back. So that's why contract can move forward with unmet terms, but not with unmet conditions. So I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, so next question here. Can you explain what is environmental stewardship? So, environmental stewardship basically is us protecting the environment for the generations that are coming. So, if we keep doing what we are doing and we keep putting in bad stuff into the environment, we are not leaving anything to our children. So, we're leaving a world that will basically be will not be good. So environmental stewardship is when we're trying to protect the environment. So that's our water, our soil, things like that for future generations. So when we talk about environmental stewardship, another thing to keep in mind is it has to make economic sense. If protecting the environment is super expensive, we cannot do it. So we have to balance protecting the environment with the cost associated with that. If the cost is too high, we cannot do that. So that's the balance. So that's environmental stewardship. So basically protecting our rivers, our soil, etc., for future generation, but also taking into account the economic impact of doing that. So in this case, when it comes to environmental stewardship, there are there's laws around it, so that we have to keep in mind. So we can't just dump stuff into our rivers and things like that. We can't dump stuff in landfills. There's ways we have to dispose of certain things, biohazard, in items and so forth. From real estate perspective, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is if there is an environmental concern with the property, and we see this generally more with a commercial property. So if you're helping someone buy, let's say, commercial building, industrial building, so warehouse, distribution center, or anything like that, there will be an environmental study required. So we don't always see that, or we rarely see that with residential properties, but we can if, let's say, the property is by a gas station. So if it's right beside a gas station, so maybe the property itself is not causing the problem, but when you have a gas station right beside a house, there are underground storage tanks in there, and the underground storage tanks can leak. And then that oil can then flow into the soil. It can flow into the surrounding properties. It can also contaminate the water, the underground water. So that's the problem with having a property close to a gas station, or if the property is close to an airport. So on the airport, again, they have underground storage tanks where they store a lot of fuel and so forth. Any kind of leaking there will contaminate the soil around it, or even the underground water sources. So that's an issue as well. Or if the property is close to a farm, that can also cause issues, because we have, again, they use a lot of pesticides. They use fertilizers that, again, can get into the water sources and contaminate those water sources. And they also have storage tanks for fuels, because they have farm equipment that will need fuel. So instead of getting the gas like every time, they will store the gas. So they have a whole bunch of gas, or propane, they may need that stored. So any of those chemicals can cause contaminations of the houses, by the airport, or by the gas station, anything like that. Contamination can be an issue. And in that case, then you have to do an environmental site assessment, ESA. There are three phases to that: environmental site assessment, phase one, phase two, and phase three. So phase one is just a study. So they basically will look at, for most cases, you just have to do ESA part one, phase one, sorry. So ESA phase one is just a record search. So basically, they will look at the permits, the city records, anything that shows that there may be a previous use of the property that could have caused contamination. That's all they're looking at. So they may do a site visit to see what kind of operations are being run on the property or close to the property. But otherwise, it's just they may interview people who work there, but usually it's just knowledge collection. They're not actually doing any testing. So that's environmental site assessment phase one. Phase two is where they will actually do the testing. So they'll take water samples, they'll take soil samples, they'll send it to the lab, and then based on the scientific analysis, then they'll determine if there is any contamination. And phase three is once they determine there is contamination, then they will look at any kind of remediation options. So in third phase, they're just coming up with a plan to fix the issue. They're not actually fixing the issue. So actual remediation is not part of phase three. So those are the three phases of environmental site assessment. And again, all of that is tied into environmental stewardship as well. Okay, so another question here. How many times can we give the exam within 6 months? Okay, so you have for each course, and this is a RICA rule, this is not our rule. So for each course, you have 2 attempts. So each time you write the exam, though, there is a fee for writing the exam that you have to pay to RICA. So the fee is $235 for each attempt. So you can have 2 attempts per course, but if you fail the second attempt, then you have to re-enroll for the course, which means, so let's say if you are our student, please don't fail. Come to us for help before you go through the second attempt, or if you're not confident with your first attempt, like just take the time. You can reschedule your exam. But if you do fail the second time around, you would have to redo the course, which means we have to re-enroll you with RICA, and we have to pay your course fees again, which means it will cost you money as well. So that's how it works. But there's no limit as to how many times you can write the exam. There are 2 attempts that you're allowed, but then you have to repay for it. So you can write the exam as many times as you want, as long as you keep re-enrolling. But you know what, the cost will get very expensive. So it's best not to do that. So try to pass in the first attempt. Okay, so another question, what is the difference between fraud for housing and fraud for profit? Okay, good question here. Uh, okay, so when we talk about frauds, there's 2 types of fraud, fraud for profit and fraud for housing. So this is in relation to properties, of course. So fraud for housing is when somebody commits fraud, so they are misrepresenting something. So they may be misrepresenting their income, so how much income they are making. They may be misrepresenting how much debt they are carrying, or they may be misrepresenting how long they have been with a company. So, for example, let's say somebody wants to buy a house, and for that they want to live in the house. They want to buy a house, and for that they need to get employment letter from the employer. So in this case, fraud for housing would basically look like this. They get an employment letter from the employer, and then they change things on that. So it may be a part-time job, but instead of part-time, they make it a full-time job, right? Or they may be making 60,000 a year. They change that to 80,000 a year, for example. So it could be the length of time they've been working there, what type of job it is, full-time versus part-time, permanent versus temporary. So those type of things. So somebody is misrepresenting something in order to qualify for the house. So they are intending to live in the house. They're not buying the house for making a profit. They want to live in the house, and they don't qualify for purchasing the house otherwise. And in order to qualify, they're going to misrepresent something. So they're going to fudge the numbers. So that's known as fraud for housing. Now, fraud for profit, on the other hand, is when you will have fraudsters, so these are crime groups, involved in it. So normally fraud for housing is just normal people trying to get into a property, trying to get a mortgage for a property. Fraud for profit, on the other hand, is when somebody's trying to do money laundering. So they may buy a house, and then they are, so let's say somebody buys an apartment building for that has 10 units in it. And then, so let's say they're making $1,000 or they're charging $1,000 in rent for each unit. But once they buy the property, they will say, oh, we're actually charging $2,000 per unit in rent. So in this case, even though they're only charging $1,000, but they added an additional $1,000 to it to make it $2,000 per unit per month, because now they are laundering. They're cleaning up $1,000 a month per unit times 10. So that's $10,000 a month times 12, $120,000 a month, a year. So that's how fraud for profit is. So they're doing fraud not so they can qualify to get a mortgage, but so that they can run some sort of a shady business through it. So money laundering is one example. Another example would be, let's say somebody buys a property and they're buying the property not to live in it, but to grow marijuana, right? So they buy a house, then they don't care about what the property looks like or anything like that. They just want a place that they can grow a lot of marijuana plants in. So that's another example of fraud for profit. So again, not trying to buy it or not trying to fudge anything so they can qualify for the to live in the house or qualify for a mortgage, but their intention is to make profit on that. So that's another example for fraud for profit. So with each one of these, fraud for housing and fraud for profit, there's multiple different schemes within each category. So the examples that I gave you are a couple of those. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Do you guys have any other questions for me? So fraud schemes are important. You do need to know the different types of fraud schemes, and you need to be able to look at a scenario and tell which type of fraud it is. Writing the fundamentals exam in August, yes. So the fraud schemes are important for that. How are you feeling about the going into the exam? Are you confident there, Aryan? So in terms of writing the exam, a few tips. I'll close off with a few tips. Looks like we don't have any more questions coming in. So a few tips when you are considering or you're looking at going into the exam. So this is what I would do. This is how I prepare for any exam. So first thing I do, I feel like I'm a pro at writing exam just because I feel like I've been a lifelong student writing so many exams. Oh my God. But this is how I prepare for the exam. Okay, so first step would be you do the course, right? So once you go through everything, you just read the course, you listen to the videos, you do your quizzes and so forth. So that's the first. So that's our Rika Recognized course, right? So you do that part of it. So once you're done with that, now that's a comprehensive, like it is a lot of material. And then once you're done with that, so if you have a student, then you reach out to us and say, okay, so I finished the recognize part. Now I want to prepare for the exam. So when you say that, we'll give you access to the study guide. So study guide is our summarized version of the full course, right? So for each unit, you will have summarized notes. So we are only focusing on key concepts. And then you'll have extra practice questions. Make sure you do your review videos, right? So we have important topics that we really want you to be confident in these topics. My biggest thing that I suggest is understand the concept. Don't try to memorize a question. Don't try to memorize stuff, because if you memorize stuff and they twist things, you will forget, right? Like you will not know. So understand the concept, and with the concept, it doesn't matter. There's only few ways a question can be asked, and even if they try to twist things on you, which they will, right? That's the whole point of examination. They will twist things, they will word it in different ways, they will try to confuse you. to make sure that you can figure out what the real question is. So in that case, even if they try to twist things on you, you still understand the concept, and therefore you will be able to answer the question. And then, of course, we have timed mock tests for you. With the timed mock test, the good thing is that the reason I was I really wanted to do the timed mock test was because then you get the experience of sitting in the exam. So the anxiety that you will have watching the clock, the questions, and so forth. And we have tried to make the mock tests hard just because we want you to experience that feeling the butterflies in your stomach while you're writing the exam. So if you are scoring 90% on the mock test, that's excellent. So generally, the rule of thumb that I would say is if you can score 90% in our quizzes and our mock tests, then you are looking at about 85 to 90% on the exam. So the questions are not the same. Please don't expect the same questions because they're not. And our whole purpose of the mock test is to test your knowledge. So if you're scoring 90% in the mock test, make sure you go redo the quizzes as well in the study guide. So you're scoring 90% on those, and then you're good to go, right? I wouldn't sweat it. When you're in the exam, make sure you stay calm. Don't panic. When I find sometimes when people look at the exam, you look at first few questions, it's like, oh my God, I do this all the time. I look at the questions, I'm like, I don't know anything, right? So don't panic. If you don't know the question, just skip it, go to the next question, because on the top there, when you're writing the exam, the color will be different between the questions that you have attempted and the questions that you have not attempted. So you'll be able to tell which questions you have left unanswered. You can come back to that. Another thing I would suggest also is if you're trying to remember any formulas or things that are really on your mind, you're trying to remember them, I would ask for a scrap piece of paper from them and just do a brain dump, right? Whatever calculation you're trying to remember or anything you're trying to remember, put it on the piece of paper. Then you free up your mind. You're freeing up space in your mind, and then start doing the exam. So once you're doing the exam, if you need that, you have your piece of paper to refer back to. So you're not, using your brain power to remember something. So this will make things a little bit easier. Anything you don't know, skip it, come back to it. You will have plenty of time. So generally, if you know your concept, you will have plenty of time to do the exam. So you should not run out of time. Question here or comment here, as I'm going through further study or studying chapter wise, I keep forgetting previous chapters. Yes, that is a big concern. That's why I don't want you to take too long to go through the material. If you're taking 6 months, by the time you're on unit 10, you would have forgotten everything about the previous unit, especially unit 1, 2, 3. Unit 2 is important, so you don't want to forget that. So I would say first, like, don't worry about memorizing things or remembering things on the first go round. So as you're doing the Read the Recognize course, listen to the videos, focus on the important concepts, but don't try to memorize anything, right? Just make sure you're understanding the concepts. And then when you're doing exam prep, then you want to condense that exam prep into a shorter period of time, and that's when you won't forget it. It'll be fresh in your mind. And this is why we have given you many, many tools. We've given you review videos. We've given you PowerPoints of all the important topics. We've given you summarized notes. Given you mock tests and quizzes. Like, all that is to help you learn in a very, or prepare for the exam in a very condensed time frame. So I wouldn't necessarily go back to our Rika Recognize course. I would just focus on the study guide. Now, there may be stuff that's missing from that, which I didn't think was important. But most of the stuff that's important, things that we experience in day-to-day life, all of that stuff, and that's the stuff that Rika wants you to know as well, right? It's not something that's extraordinary they want you to know. It's just the day-to-day stuff that you will do as a real estate agent. So all that stuff we have focused on as well. So I would focus on that. But as you're initially going through it, don't worry about memorizing anything or remembering stuff. You will have time to prepare at the end. So that's when I would condense the time, shorten the time. and do your exam prep like within 2 weeks, and then just go write the exam. Like, don't overthink it. Okay. All right. So, any other questions before we wrap it up? Okay, question here. If I register a fundamentals and residential together, will that be considered 6 months' time to finish both? Okay, so if you and when you enroll with us for our bundle, we actually only give you access to the fundamentals course first, and that is to prevent that timeline starting for the second course. So first, we give you access to the fundamentals of the real estate course. Let's say you get it done in 2 months. So then we will give you access to the residential so that your time frame will start separately for each course, not together. So you do have up to 1 year to finish both the courses. Yes, so comment here for each chapter, there's that 100 pages, so there's more than 1,000 pages. Yes, it is very content heavy. These are content heavy courses. So again, I would say go through the videos, go through the slides, but don't try to just focus on the important things we call out, right? But you don't need to memorize everything. Don't try to deep study everything. Once you have finish the like the so once you finish the recurring course, then you focus on actually preparing for the exam, right? To separate the two. It's like when you're writing an essay, you should never proofread the essay as you're writing it. The first one is just get stuff down and then you proofread it, right? So they're two separate activities. So don't try to do them together. If you're trying to do them together, it is exhausting. It is lot of stuff. It is exhausting, but think of it like this. You're just brushing through it first, right? What I have seen some people do is focus on the videos as the main thing. And, you can even look at the slides as you're doing the videos because it's the same slides that we have in the videos as the slides that you get that we give you. So you can even click through them as you're listening to the video. So that will, then you're doing two in one, right? So that will make the process faster. Or if you study better by first listening to the video and then reading the slides, you have that option as well. But I wouldn't try to read every single word. There's tons of stuff. I find it's easier when somebody just explains something to me. Okay, I got the concept, and let's look at the quiz. Kobe here. Thank you so much. Because of you, I passed the fundamentals exam. Your content was perfect for the exam. Thank you. Hey, congratulations. That's awesome. Awesome. So difference in fundamental versus residential exam. Okay, and is fundamentals exam easier? Yes, fundamentals exam is easier. Most people take longer to do the fundamentals course than the residential course. Most people do residential course much faster than the fundamentals course. And the reason for that is because when you're doing the fundamentals course, this is your first time going through it. You don't know what to expect. You're learning a lot of theoretical stuff. So it takes longer, right? So, but once you've done the fundamentals in the residential course, there's a lot of repetition from the fundamentals. So, a lot of the concepts you're just brushing up on, you're reviewing them in the residential. And in the residential course, there's also more practical stuff that you will learn, which most people find. More interesting to study. So that makes a residential course easier compared to the fundamentals. However, residential exam is harder than the fundamentals exam just because. So a couple of things here. So the first one is in the fundamentals exam, for most of the questions you're selecting, one out of four options, or sometimes it's all of the above, or it may be like two out of four. But the number of questions where you have to choose multiple options, there's only few of them, right? So it may say stuff like statements 1, 2, and 3, or statement 2, 3, 4, but there's few questions that will ask you to do that. But when you go to the residential exam, there's a lot more of those questions. So on the fundamentals exam, you have 145 questions. On the residential exam, you only have 120 questions, but those 120 questions will be 2 out of 4 statements are correct or 3 out of 4 statements are correct. It's not one. It's easier to choose one option out of the 4 than to choose 3 out of 4, because there will be invariably there'll be 2 options that are very, very similar. And this is where, if you know your concept, then it will be easier to pick out the incorrect, because they're so close. If you don't, you'd be like, oh, they're the same, right? But they're not the same. There is a minor difference between the two. And that's why I really say focus on the concept, knowing the concept or understanding the concept, because there will be a lot of that where there's, two statements so very similar, but then you pick the wrong one, and even though the other 2 options are correct, you still get a 0 on that question, just because overall you didn't get all 3 correct. So that's why the residential tends to be a little bit harder. And we find that based on our scores as well, what we see for our students, our passing rate is what, 87% for the fundamentals and 83, 84 for residential. It's just because of that, right? Just picking 3 out of 4 becomes a little bit more challenging. But having said that, a lot of the residential is a review from the fundamentals, so you'll get through the course much quicker. Okay, but if you did well on the fundamentals, you're fine, right? So don't stress out. I don't want anybody stressing out. Okay. Sounds good. Commercial is another story. Commercial, we are not offering yet. We will be offering come fall. And the reason I have chosen not to offer the commercial course right now is because it's difficult. So if we were to take a look at the passing rate, so of other schools, we don't offer it, right? So if you go to Vika website and you look at the results, passing rates, there's only 2 course providers, 3 course providers now that are offering the commercial course. The problem, though, is the passing rate of one of them is 43% and the other one is 56%, right? So basically half of the people fail the commercial exam. So this is why we have not done it. Now, once we launch the commercial exam, my focus is to make sure everybody understands and people are able to pass the exam. So you know the concepts and you're able to pass the exam. That's always my focus. So we will be offering it. I'm currently working on the materials for that. The concern is how do we get this is what I'm working, my challenge right now is how do I get the concept across in a way that's simple, it's understandable, something you will remember and you'll be able to replicate when it comes to the exam. But commercial is one of the harder exams of all the exams. So property management has a lot of overlap with commercial as well. So property management, I would say, is the second hardest in the real estate exams. And then also the practice of mortgage brokerage, there tend to be a lot of calculations in that, and there's commercial component in that. So I'm actually working on all 3 courses right now, so we'll be offering those in fall. But commercial is it's difficult. It's more of a challenging exam than compared to others. So I think fundamentals is the easiest, then residential, then our rural is, I think rural is not too bad. And then the property management and commercial. So commercial tends to be one of the harder ones for most people. All right, so I think that's it for all the questions. So thank you so much, guys, for joining me on a Saturday. It is beautiful outside, so hope you enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your weekend. Do spend some time on studying as well. But you know what, we have shorter summers, so please do enjoy it. And we will have our Q&A session, the students one, next Saturday again at 10 o'clock. So we'll send you the Zoom link for that. So please come join that as well. Okay, so that's it for today. Have a wonderful weekend. I will see you next time. Bye for now.